Last time we discussed the bittul of Chochmeh and how the bittul of Mechin Bichlal is the remedy for the yeshus which is found in Midas or b'miyuchad in Machlekes. But we were left off with a question that l'cheire Mechin is kol inyanis is Heicholtzu. In other words, whenever we approach Mechin, we see that Mechin comes to differentiate, Mechin comes to dissect, Mechin makes things complicated. Mechin is what will bring Achdus. And that's what we have to discuss tonight, how Mechin Dafke, despite the fact that Mechin has this Chalkus, Mechin will also bring us to Bittul, and Mechin will bring us to Achdus. So before we approach the solution and the Biur Inyan, the way it is in the Mamer, let's first properly take apart the question. So we get the question right. Mechin, kol inyani is that there are two things which look similar, and Mechin will tell us how different they are. Every Inyan Sichli, every teretz is asidot tzvei dinim. Two things that looked similar. Mela was a kasha. So we came on, we were mechalek, and it showed the way how they're different. Every kasha is a chiluk. Two things which looked like they were harmonious. Seichel came and put a wedge in between them, saying that there's an issue. So Mechin is always coming to make chiluk. The emesis, the very idea of his chalkus comes from Mechin. So let's come from this direction. Dibur, vocabulary, comes from Mechin. Was heißt? Bepashtus, the fact that I have more than one word for a similar thing is because Seichel is mechayev, necessitates us to make another word. When there are few words which are synonyms for one idea, it's not pshat that they're the same thing. If it's not two words, it's just you doubling over. Yeah, it's not like we get the Merkos and Chazak thesaurus, and it sounds like you're saying three words to say the same thing. Every word is born out of necessity, because that word didn't do justice for this idea, and we needed to have another word to bring out this idea in its exact manner. We want to bring out the nuance. So b'pashtus, if there's esel l'shenis shel simcha, it's not the taitches that these 10 words mean the same. Fakert. Shitchi is, for a child, you have one word, he's happy. But the truth is that there's simcha, there's gila, there's zrina, there's chedve, there's joy, there's happiness, there's jubilation, nechveis. I mean, these are different ideas, which sound similar. Where does this necessity come from? Where did we come to this Heicholtzu? Because of Seichel. So the more intelligent a person is, meaning the more he sees differences, the more words he's going to have to use. So his vocabulary will be broader, or better said, deeper. He's going to have a richer vocabulary, because he's going to use words with their exact meaning and place them in a richtige eifel. So words, the Heicholtzu of words, comes be'emes from the Heicholtzu of Seichel. Like it says, B'loshen HaKabbalah, Abba Yosef Brata. Abba is Chochmah, and Brata is Malchus, which is Dibur. Where does the Rabbi Asius come from? Comes from Chochmah. So the words of the Chilukim, the Heicholtzu, comes from Seichel. What are we saying? That the solution for all the problems of a yeshus and machlekes, there's a machlekes in the midas between chesed and gevura, or if there's a machlekes between two people who are chesed and gevura dika people, or two people which have different opinions and approaches, is the seder is use mechin. Meichin. Meichin is the makar of all the tzaras. Meichin is the sibba why there's this chalkus. If without Meichin, things would have been simple and pashut. Like a child sees one, he doesn't see the necessity for nuance and ribu. So Meichin is really the makar for the problem. Let's just add that this question is not just a question when again machlekes, how Meichin is a solution for machlekes. The question is tifer. This whole concept of meich shalat al alev, this yisod of Chassidus Chabad, that Chabad is the solution for every problem. L'cheira, what are the problems? The problems are that things are complicated. I have a problem of atzvus. I have a problem of yush. I have a problem of sfeikis. What's the eitzah? Is meichin. Meichin is doch the makar of all his chalkus. Meichin is the most yeshestika place. We want to bring Chabad into the picture. So this is a question, first of all, benegei our specific sugya of machlekes, but secondly, more broadly about Chabad bichlal. Why are we looking that Chabad should be shelet al midas, and how is that going to help the midas become more settled and more focused? So the answer in our Mamer is azay. First, he says a poshet word, that the Heicholtzu in Meichin is mitzad habina, but not mitzad hachacham. Okay. But then we say a tifer abir, that the emes is that even the Heicholtzu mitzad habina is really a inyan of achdus. In other words, Meichin bichlal, including bina, is achdus. It's Heicholtzu. It's the Heicholtzu which brings us to achdus. Which this is a yesod in Chassidus, that Heicholtzu dafka brings us to achdus. And this is what we're going to be discussing tonight. Why is it, to say that from differentiating and making separations and divisions, will that lead us to a place of more achdus and wholesomeness? Now, there are places in Chassidus where a similar idea is discussed, where we say that real pshitis could bring to Heicholtzu, which is based bechlolus on the idea of kshem shesh lekech bilti bagul kach yesh lekech bigvul. The real bligvul will lead us also to come to Heicholtzu. So the mashal for that is that a Rav who understands the seichel in a eifin pashut, he's not limited to understanding it in a eifin of bligvul. He could also bring it down like Shleim HaMelech and Shleish Salaf in mashal and bring it down to a child. So real pshitis and bligvul would bring to Heicholtzu and gvul. But our Mamer is not saying this idea. Over here we're saying the opposite. Not pshitis brings to Heicholtzu, not fakert. Heicholtzu brings to pshitis. And the question is why? Now behektem a pashatev word, which is that Heicholtzu is a solution for machlekes. Medezelt, the Friedrich Rebbe says that the reason why in the times of the Tzemach Tzedek there was such shalom between Chassidim and Misnagdim, and the Tzemach Tzedek worked with Rabbi Volozhiner, and it helped for the battle against Askola, and it helped for Askonis in Gashmis for Yidden. It says, we sagt in the Welt, at that time the Chassidim learned that the Misnagdim have Tzadikim, and the Misnagdim learned that the Chassidim have Lomdim. It was a time of Achdus of Klal Yisroel throughout Russia and Poland. How do we get to this point? So the Friedrich Rebbe says in Interessante Zach, in the times of the Alter Rebbe, the fire of Machlekes was burning. Things were out of control. It was Mesiris, and there was places where it was Sakonis Nefashis. There was no way Chassidim and Misnagdim could come eye to eye. So during the Nesias of the Mittler Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe hat weggestellt a new klal, a rule by Chassidim, that a Chassid is not allowed to talk or have any relationship with a Misnagid, to the point you're not allowed to walk into a Misnagid Shishum. Und das hat mir Mekayim given. Chassidim who lived in a town where there was only a Misnagid Shul, they would hear Kedusha and Baruch Hu from outside. It was a ironclad rule that no one was over. All the investment of the Mittler Rebbe was with Chassidim amongst themselves. There's no Afatz Mayamis. Everyone was involved in as zwei junge Leute, und reden Yichudei La Yichud Tatam, so Tannen Chassidis, zwischen Chassidim. There was no dealing with the Misnagdische world. Sagt der Friediker Rebbe sehr interessant. As a result of this policy, the Machlekes calmed down. Memele, it came to the time of Tzemach Tzedek, if there was a need to deal with issues of Klal Yisroel, it already been years since anybody was fighting. Memele thinks people came together, hat man kennt Tanshal. Maybe, not on the same darge, obviously, but al derech, anytime you have two people fighting, or you have two children fighting, the first solution to do is, you separate them, you send one in one room, one in another. Within 5 minutes, they join together again and they're playing nicely. The Yisod is Pashut. That the Machlekes is because they're in each other's faces. You separate them, they calm down, so things are back in control, so they could be together again. It's just the erste Sache where you see that his Heicholtzu, or technically his Heicholtzu, brings the Achdus. But obviously this is not enough. Because Sachakel, what we're saying is that technically the Heicholtzu will lead to Achdus. But it's not making a real Achdus. Was heißt? The reason these kids are fighting is stam. Because they got out of control. Their emotions got the better of them. So you separate them. The kas, the gaiva calms down. They don't have any grudges. So mele now they can play together. And al derech zeba, the Chassidim ha-misnagdim, was obviously we're not talking about the Gdei Chassidim or even the Misnagdim, which the Kavanah was Lishma, but it came to a point where it just became a community battle. It was politics. So because it was a shtus, so let it calm down. And now, but if we're talking a real Heicholtzu, says the real Machlekes, where there's two approaches, or there's Chesed and Gvur, so how does separating them help? So Heicholtzu in that case is helping make Achdus only in a very narrow situation, in a very specific case, when the Machlekes were the Chatchila based on Shtus. But when we're talking about a real Machlekes, how's Heicholtzu helping? So this is the beer in our Mamer, how Heicholtzu is really the solution for Achdus. Und verkehrt, the same Seichel, which in Yoni is Heicholtzu, is really going to lead us to a place of Achdus. So let's begin with the Pashta Moshe. In Chassidus is brought the Moshe of two Sarim. And our two Sarim come by Achdus. So let's Lamer a bissel mehr Marchiv sein on this Moshe. In every government, you have different Sarim. So let's say you have the Sara Bitochen, the Minister of Defense, and you have the Sara Eitzar, who is the Minister of Finance. Now, Kumuven, each one of them, if they're doing the job properly, are not going to be save the other one. They will never be able to see eye to eye. The Minister of Defense is looking to constantly build barriers. He doesn't want to have relationships with other countries for defense reasons. The Minister of Commerce, of Finance, is looking to constantly develop relationships, to invest in other countries, others should invest in him. It could be on the cheshbon of the security, of the defense. Nicht das ist ein Memele, these two, the Sara Eitzer and the Sara Bitochen, are constantly head to head. They are, each one, it's a tug of war. Who's going to win this battle? Now, what's the Eitzah? So there is a Eitzah Amol Retman that if you have a Gili of the Melech himself, then they'll come Ba'achtus. Because they'll both be in his battle, and really he'll be Megala da Achlifu D'Chtayu, that you could do his job and he could do his job. Memele, that's one way of dealing with the Machlekes, is just by crushing it, by being Megala Eir Elyon of the Melech. But that would only help for when you're by the Melech. Lapoil, each one is now going to go back to his office, he's back to his agenda. And my agenda clashes with your agenda. So you haven't really found a real, honest solution for making these people work together. So what's the Eitzah? The Eitzah is, let's have a conversation with this Sarah Bitoch. He says he only cares about defense. He doesn't know of anything else. I tell him, you yourself, in your army, you have an accountant. In other words, you know that there's such a thing called balancing a budget. You understand that you have to have of money. So, you don't understand the world of dealing with the finances. And I'll go say to the Sarah Eitzer, outside your bank or wherever you keep your money, you have a security guard. And you invest money in it. So you understand very well that there is such an idea within your world. There is such an idea, whatever the Sarah Eitzer is presenting, you have the me'ain of the same thing you have by you. Lass mir sagen, a step weiter. It's not just the taich, I'll tell the Sarah Eitzer, that you have to have a security guard over there. If there won't be an army, so the country will be in peril, and there'll be no money. And I'll tell the Sarah Bitochin, if there's no money in the country, then you have no way to finance your army. So it's not just the taich that you have to have an idea of Eitzer, of Bitachon, one and the other, B'zei Rampin. I need to have the other. So of course, still the Sarah Bitachon is going to look at the Sarah Eitzer as a necessity in way to enrich the army. And faket, the army calling Yonah in the eyes of the Sarah Eitzer will be a way of protecting the commerce. Fine. But at least we've come to a point where we're communicating with each other with a basic level of respect, that we understand that we need each other. Was heißt? How did we get to this point? What we did is Heicholtzu. If I looked at army, at bitachon, as an akuda of this is all there is, so then there's no space, there's no reason for me to accept that there's any other. But if I take it apart, I make it Heicholtzu within the world of army, and I understand there's a part of the army, somebody who is sitting in the uniform of the army, who is sitting by a computer making cheshbonos of money. So I understand 1 second. It's not one dimension. It's a part of Shalom. I understand that I also need the other. Kommt is that by making a Heicholtzu, that's how I brought a Achdus between these two. Lamda sagen, Pashat in Midas is the same thing. Chesed and Gvura don't see eye to eye. Chesed says to give, Gvura says not to give. But if I turn to Chesed and I say, the only way you could be a functional Chesed, a successful Chesed, is by practicing some Gvura. If you want to teach, you're going to have to know what not to say. If you're going to want to care for your child, you're going to have to sometimes punish. So, real Chesed needs, behalt in sich also the inyan of Gvura. So don't tell me that you don't hold a Gvura at all. You contain Gvura within yourself. You possess Gvura. How did that happen? By taking Chesed off his high horse of being an Akuda of Chesed and bringing him down to a point where really he understands that Chesed is comprised of Kama v'Kama Pratim. And understanding that one of these Pratim is really the one I'm talking so much against. Achred, against Gvura. Really, I have it within me. For my own parts, for my own shleimus, I need it. Not only do I need it, I have it already. When Al Derech Zeh, Gvura will do to Chesed. He'll find the Nukuda of Chesed within him. I want to be Gvuradik. I want to hate. Good. If you want to be evil, you want to be Gvuradik, you're going to have to know how to give. Maybe give bad. Give something negative. But the Tnuah of giving is part of the Tnuah of Chesed. So Sai Gvura and Sai Chesed finding themselves the other. How? By making his chalkos within their own parts. So Da'amal in Chassidus, where we say that this is the difference between a sfira and a partzuf. A sfira is an akudah. It's just the idea of chesed. The partzuf shalom means that it's the way chesed is killing him all the other spheres. Al Pizeh, we're going to understand why Seichel on the one hand take in Yoni is his chalkos. But that his chalkos is what's going to bring us to a place of achdus. Because Seichel will look at the world and start differentiating between things. Seichel will bring us to a place where eventually everything will be able to come together. Pashat Begashmius, it's also like that. Now Mamer, he says that, says do Eish and Mayim. Eish and Mayim are opposites. They'll never mix. But there's a concept called Heitzi Eish mi Mayim v'Mayim mi Eish. I'm going to be able to bring out one from the other. How? Because al libe de emes, there's no such thing as Eish without Mayim and Mayim without Eish. Every one of them has all the Daled Yiseides. Every one of the elements has everything. L'mashal says that Mayim looks like it's just Mayim. But if you'll take water and you'll put it in a pot on fire, you'll see that some of the water will become steam, which is ruach. Some of the water will burn the flame, meaning, obviously, because there's water in the pot, that's why the pot didn't burn. So what's feeding the flame is water. Some of the water, at the end, once it burns out, there's going to be the, what's it called? The offer shebemayim, the white dust, which is at the bottom of the pot, which you see in a kettle sometimes. So there's the offer, there's the particles which they exist in the water. So kumta is that really what looked to us like just mayim pshutim is really murkev of eish ruach mayim and offer. And al derech zeh an eish. You also have all those yiseides. Now when eish and mayim meet, but pashas there's stir. How could you have that they should be able to live with each other? Is that if each one brings out from the other the nukuda, the eish meets the eish b'mayim. The mayim meets the mayim shebeish. The mele, it's al kopanim, a pesach. It's an opening for beginning of talks between each other, so we'll be able to sit by one table. How to find the other in myself, or to find myself in the other. The emes is that this is true not just in the idea of seichel, how seichel is helping us in the world of midas to separate in chesed, or like we say in the Moshe of Saretz and Sarabitach, and not just how what seichel does to Gashmi is to find within the Eishan Mayim, to find the different pratim. This is really the idea of seichel itself. Seichel, by definition, always looks like he's doing his chalkos, but really what's Seichel doing? He's bringing us to a place of Achdus. Was heißt? What is Seichel? What's Seichel looking to do? Is Lama sagen azeh. Adam Rishon comes in the world and he sees thousands of objects, things. How does Adam Rishon start learning, studying the world? Seichel. What does Seichel look to do? Seichel looks to make klal. Klalim is the taich to find common denominators between a group of things and categorize them under one category. L'mashal, to say that there's David Samei Chai Medaber. There's many kinds of Medaberim. As a rule, this would be in one group. And all the different Chai, a goldfish with an elephant belongs in one group, and a blade of grass with an oak tree also belongs in one group. And water, together with a diamond, is the Suga Daimim. I've grouped them in groups. Now this grouping, Zog the Rambam, doesn't exist in Metzias, obviously. It's all in the mind. The whole concept of the Lashon Rambam is min. To say there's different minim exists only in the eye of the one who's studying it. Before the Marishan, there weren't groups, there was just things. And even after he came, the mitzad, the things themselves, there's no Heicholtzu. There's no, groups. So Seichel really is looking to make Achdus, looking to make cohesiveness. How did he come to this place? How did Adam Marishan come to a Nekudah where I made a group called Daimah and a group called Tzemech? The only way he could come there is by making his chalkos. What does Seichel do? Seichel comes to a place and he says, there is over here a goldfish. There's a bird. There's a cat. The pashas, they're different things. But let me take each one of them and take them apart and say, right, Takia, the cat has 4 legs and the bird doesn't. But that lavdaka doesn't mean that they're the two different sugim. Let's take out the level of intelligence. Let's take out the looks. Let's take out the shape and the weight. We'll look at the tchuna of what a chai is. He has a life force. On the one hand, le'idach is not a medaber. He has movement. Like it says that a chai is something which is mobile. It goes from place to place. Oh, I found certain tchunas, and these are common denominators which go through all of the min achai, and therefore we'll put them in one group. How did I come to that place? By looking at this animal not as one thing, as a sheep. It's not one thing. I separate the wool and his shape and his height and the food he eats. I separate all of these things into different particles, and I find one part of him, the fact that he is alive, the fact that he has a rotzen, and I say, oh, over here, in this practice is similar to something else. So it's the Heicholtzu which has brought me to a world of Achdus. Through separating different ideas, cutting them into tiny particles, I could make more Achdus. Let's say a different dugma. Seichel teaches us klal. Lass sagen, there's a klal of keich hameshich, gravity. Gravity is a klal. How do I know this klal? This klal purely exists in Seichel. There's no thing called gravity. We understand that there must be such a thing called the keich hameshich. How do I come to this place of clarity that there is keich hameshich? Only from his Heicholtzu. What happens? One day, someone was looking and he sees as an apple falls from the tree. Then he sees another thing, that the sun moves in a cycle. Another thing he sees is that a person finds it hard to jump off the ground. Or if he does, he falls straight back down. He goes through different pratim. What do I have to do now? Leave the apple with all its tchunis. Just look at the fact that he has weight. And look at only the weight sheba adam. Meaning take the person and separate the weight sheba from everything else. And then there's the weight of the cycle of the sun. You bring all these things together, you say, how I found the nekude hapratis in each one, that made me a klal. So every klal sichli was really based on his chalkus. By looking at things in a more pratistic way, by inspecting them in detail and pulling out one detail out of everything to draw a common denominator. Kumtais. The real achdus isn't here despite his chalkus. It's based off his chalkus. Only with introducing his chalkus, real his chalkus, by dividing and separating and differentiating, that's when I get a thorough clarity of the situation. That's when I could start drawing comparisons and making connections. The associations I make are all based off the Heicholtzu. The emes is Yeder kasha and teretz and seichel is azeh. What's the taich of kasha? Pashtus. Kasha is the taich that two things are stir at each other. What's the teretz? How do I make a teretz? The yisod of the teretz is that you didn't inspect the braise, which you think is a stir to the Mishnah properly. There's two pratim in the braise. Or there's two options of what case this braise could be talking about. And this Mishnah could be talking about two different cases. Let's say the braise is talking about case Aleph, and this is talking about case Beis, or Mamer is nicht stir. So every time I'm saying it's based on his chalkus, and through that makes his yashvus and achdus, that they're not stir to each other. How do things become cohesive? By making more separation. Al derech zeh, in another kind of teretz. If there's a teretz which is not a hechetimtze, nor a teretz where we say that be'etzem it's two dinim. So it's doch sicher based on his chalkus. Two things which sounded like they're stirred to each other. If you realize it's based off two dinim, so now they fit with each other. It's two halves of a different puzzle. It's two halves of the puzzle. Al kol panim, das sagt man da in unserem Mamer. Lesikum, what's the solution to make achdus when I have yeshes, when I have ischalkus of midas? Bring in meichin, which is going to make more ischalkus. And the more ischalkus and differentiations you make, it will bring us to a place of achdus. And we saw this, Sai b'negeya, talking a moshel from the Sarah Eitzer, Sarah Bitochen, and in Chesed u'Gvura, and al derech zeh in Eish and Mayim, and now within the world of Seichel itself, where I have klolim, which are based off his chalkus, which brings us to a klal, which is by definition achdus. Therefore, the world of machlekes could only be dealt with in a even of seichel. Lass uns das abteichen more in the Rebbe's Sprach. There's different kinds of Yidden. There's Teire Yidden, there's Gemilas Chsadim, there's Aveda. Bepashtus. Teire Yid und Gemilas Chsadim Yid, Yisachar and Zvulun. They shouldn't be on talking terms. There's no relationship between them. Each one of them has a different job, a different inyan, an area of expertise, and that's it. But that's only because there was no Heicholtzu. If this Torah Yid will sit down and realize that I also have to be Mekayim mitzvahs ma'asis. I also have to do Gemilas Chasadim. Nicht nur das. It's negeya for my Torah that there should be a world of Gemilas Chasadim. First of all, that there should be Tamchin Deiraisa. It's impossible for me to survive without him. Zweitens, I myself personally must also have this in order to be able to be Matzliach in Torah. And al derech ze can move in the Gemilas Chasadim person. He's saying Inyani is to be a supporter of Torah. It's not true. Every Yid has to have his own Kfiyas Sittim. And therefore, when you have this matzav, where each one of them is realizing how really Bizeir Ampen he must have part of the other, that calms the friction between the different segments or sects within Klal Yisrael. Of course, Klal Yisrael has Yud Beis Shvatim and has different paths. And as Eidav Zayin, and it would be wrong if it would be opposite. It would be Neshamas HaTeis. But because each one finds the other within him, so he doesn't look at the other as the enemy. He looks at the other who's being mashna part of my puzzle. How does that begin? Only through properly taking apart what my real tafkid is, understanding the details of what I'm comprised of, or memela being able to say that the other and me are not so different. This is true not just in Machlekes. This is true in Bichlal Aved of Chabad. Of course, what Chabad does is it takes things apart. The union of Chabad is to understand Pratim, to understand Madreges. It sounds like what we're doing is making things more complicated. But the truth is, it's Adarabe makes it more Beis Yashvus. How do I become thoroughly connected? In detail, how do things start settling? Different stitters which I have. Lama Zogen. A person has, on the one hand, I have to be b'simcha. On the other hand, Montech Kabbalah said. So, without Chabad, these two modes don't work together. If you learn Chabad, and in Chassidus is Masbir, what Simcha is comprised of, what Kabbalah Seil really is, and you start understanding, you're drawing associations between them, that fakert, maybe Dafke Simcha is built of Bittel, and real Bittel brings to Simcha. Yisroel Novim B'Havai Simcha. This is Stam Dugma. And al derech zeh riba in Yonim, which mitzad the way they are in the Eifen of Nekuda, they're still to each other. But as soon as you start building a parts of Shalom and learning about them, in the Eifen of Chabad, things start settling and coming together. And that's what produces wholesome midas. Midas which are settled. Midas which fit. Something that could stay. It's not a momentary inspiration where I'm pulled in one direction. And then the next day it's andere midah. Midas which settle. Midas which make sense. Midas which are anchored in truth, in coherent systems. Memela, as evetzes bleiben. That's why the whole Yesod of Chabad is built on his bonus in Mechin. It's taka derech aruka, but eventually it's the derech aruka which brings to ktsara, because it brings to ultimately it brings to a viable, long-standing solution and derech in Avodas Hashem.